Hello folks, welcome to my channel, or welcome back. This is one of the items I purchased and unboxed in my last video, and I'd like to give you an honest first impression. The first step is to get familiar with my materials. I'll show my swatching a few select squares. I didn't add enough pigment in the first square, and adding more in the second, I got a really nice result. The yellow is very vibrant, and it melted really well. Having said that, I also have to remember that these are not watercolors. They don't lift as well, so I often got a line I couldn't get rid of. Regarding technique, I spent time trying to melt the pigment in the area I laid down pigment before moving on to the rest of the square. The ochre turned out pretty well, but I also found myself pushing the melted pastel upwards to get a smoother transition from opaque to transparent, the way you might work a piece of clay. Often I would get crumbs that wouldn't melt under the weight of my brush, so I would simply pick them out and discard them. I want to show one last color, and that is black. It's very pigmented, and given how much I used, I can lift a lot of it to show a light gray. Well, if I wanted to. Overall, the colors are very bright and vibrant. Some of them melted better than others, although the crumbs I can work around, but the most important thing is whether or not it dries with that nice velvety smooth finish that you can expect from regular oil pastels. Looking at the swatches, the better they melted, the smoother they dried. You know, of course. The yellow and black turned out really nice, while some of the others look very uneven and I might even say kind of cakey. On the plus side, they were easy to apply to the watercolor paper. I had tried using regular oil pastels on watercolor paper before, and it was very frustrating because it wouldn't stay on the surface. It was the first time I was using oil pastels, and I hadn't heard of ingress paper or pastel mats. In any case, the Mungyo water-soluble pastels easily stayed where they should. So I have limited experience with using oil pastels. I played around with some Pentel oil pastels over 10 years ago, resulting in one poster-size work, 2 doodles, and an experiment on the backing of a frame. I learned a couple of techniques, and I'll employ everything I know while working with the regular oil pastels. Hopefully that will give some baseline for where I'm at with oil pastels. I want to quickly note that the colors between the regular oil pastels and the water-soluble ones don't match, although the cobalt blue regular oil pastel looks very similar to the sky blue water-soluble pastel, so I'm going to use those. I know there are ways to add more texture, but for this study, I want something that looks smooth. To achieve this, I'm going to employ two techniques. One, I'm going to use mineral spirits to dilute the oil pastel and a brush to apply it. Second, I'm going to use a stump to smooth over everything. With a brush, you can blend by diluting the pastel, while with a stump, you're more or less pushing the pastel around as though it were clay. Okay, so a big disclaimer, I'm very new to making reviews, and I understand that painting the two ribbons in the sketchbook isn't a fair comparison, as the paper started to buckle with the first layer of water-soluble pastel. I had applied mineral spirits to the regular oil pastel, which allowed me to add layers and vary the thickness of the overall application. For the second ribbon, I was worried that the paper would buckle again with more water. So with the second layer of water-soluble pastel, I didn't dilute the pastel at all, which makes the end result more cakey than it would have been. So I'm going to try again, but on watercolor paper, so I can work on smoothing over the pastel as much as I did with the regular oil pastel. Ideally, if the water-soluble ones work out, I can consider them for multimedia work, where the background could be painted with watercolor and the areas I want to look more luxurious would be painted with oil pastels. But we'll see. In this attempt, I learned that the stump is not much help. That technique of pushing around pastel with the stump, I actually found myself doing with a brush. Because I was able to dilute the pigment so much with the water, it was much more easy to move around. So even though the bristles on the brush were very flexible, they could still kind of push around the pigment as much as a stump could do for the oil pastel. So to be honest, I was ready to give this a bad review. But I had a moment to pause between editing, and with more time during the weekend to slow down and think, I realized that maybe I should try hot pressed paper. When using cold pressed paper, I found myself scrubbing the surface because the paper was a little too good at catching pigment. And I think that contributed to the image looking more cakey than it would have. If I want a smooth artwork, it only makes sense to start with smooth paper, which seems really obvious now. And what do you know? It worked. Overall, I found the water-soluble pastels easier to melt with water than the oil pastels with mineral spirits. I also found myself using a different technique to apply the pastel. Instead of adding layers with more pastel, I found myself picking up pastel from areas that had too much. The only moments when I added pastel to the paper was when I had a dry surface. I was also very generous with that first instance of applying pastel, so I found myself actually just moving that around. It was like working with very, very wet clay. It got bubbly when there was more water, and sometimes it would dry with a little more texture because of the bubbles. I had to remember that the last brush strokes can affect the way it dries. So it helped to use wide continuous brush strokes to smooth over areas before leaving it alone. Okay, I hope you found this review helpful. I think that when it comes to how good a product is, it's also a matter of what you can do yourself with what you're given. There are certainly some products that are easier to work with than others, but your own ability to figure out how to make the most out of a product that you're given to use has a lot to do with it too. And that's the end of the video. If you enjoyed this video, and if you're still here, thank you for staying to the end. Please consider clicking on the subscribe button to be notified of when future videos will be uploaded. Thank you for stopping by.